Hi, Bren. Thank you so much for joining. You're the program director for New Filmmakers New York, which screens out of the Anthology Film Archives. I've had a movie screen there in the series, and I wanted to talk to you because, film festivals have always been competitive, but since the digital revolution with digital cameras, the number of submissions that they're seeing are insane, and the chance of actually an independent film without A-list talent attached of landing in a top tier festival is pretty impossible. So the question becomes, what do independent filmmakers do? Do you spend all this money applying on festivals you might not get into or most likely won't get into? There's all these other festivals you can apply to, but what will they actually do for your movie? And the reason why I want to talk about New Filmmakers is because it's a film that independent filmmakers can actually get their movie in a great theater. And I was able to get distribution as a result of it. So, what's your role in the process?
I am one of the festival directors for New Filmmakers New York. New Filmmakers has changed a little bit, I think, since you've been a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
We are now 100% online.
Mm-hmm.
We have gone into a collaboration with a service that allows us to do live screening rooms
Mm-hmm.
in which the audience is allowed to participate at the same time while they're on their own cameras from home. It's much better for filmmakers to get the audience participation in on online. And this is interesting because we're now stepping a generation ahead of what you were talking
Mm-hmm.
about, which was in the theaters. Of course, our friend that visited us for 2 years and did not flatten the curve, which we all know what it is, has changed festivals permanently in many cases. Many of them went online. I think Tribeca is online now. I don't know how much of it is back in theaters. I believe that Sundance was back in theaters this year, but I didn't quite hear the buzz. I'm out in Los Angeles now,
Mm-hmm.
and I really didn't hear quite the buzz of people going to Sundance that I used to a decade or more ago. So yes, New Filmmakers, we're online. It's very similar process for submission. You still go through Film Freeway. We also do accept festival submissions through Fast Home. And then when we program it in, it's very similar in a way to a playlist, but the filmmakers get to pick when they screen. And that's something that in the past, when we were dealing with films, we often would get requests from filmmakers. Well, I can't do that Wednesday. Could I do the following month Wednesday? And sometimes it became a little bit of a Burger King, I'd like to have it my way type situation. Which didn't always work out because we were showing somewhere around 800 films a year, features and shorts. And now the filmmaker can actually say, here's a time in which my mom can watch or my friends can watch. So I'll schedule in this screening then. And then you can have it snowball where one of those friends says, well, a bunch of us from film school, we're not able to watch it at the same time the filmmaker is, but we'd like to do our own private screening. And so they can snowball. And over the course of a quarter, you can have several screenings of a film. So it's a process that I'm much happier with when it comes to online, because I know a lot of other festivals are giving you this is your screening, this is your online screening, and that's it in your secure screening room. And we're leaving it more up to the filmmakers to be active in that sense.
Yeah, that you mentioned, people not being able to attend a certain screening at a certain time, and I had that same experience with a movie at a different festival where I think they scheduled it at like 11 a.m. on a Monday, and they
Oh,
just had too
terrible.
many movies. They were trying to do this whole thing for like 2 weeks. They were trying to be Sundance, but without sort of the people attending that attend Sundance.
Yeah.
And it's one thing if you have a movie that, is probably going to be sold for $5-10 million. You'll take the Monday off because the people are going to be there. But for a lot of independent filmmakers, you're not looking at that sort of guarantee. This is an opportunity to watch your movie, have people watch your movie. And the fact that, you are working with the filmmakers shows you really understand who you're sort of working with. You sort of really get the needs of the people. And the result is, you have a festival. Like I said, I was able to get distribution right through your very website. You can reach out to distributors. I had a distributor reach out to me. Uh, so it's not just a movie gets put into into a sort of dark room. You get to write something on your social media and nothing happens. There actually is a life after. How do you go about picking the movies that you screen?
Well, in the past, as we screen through the movies, shorts, the length of the short plays a bit into it. We've always done categories and genres, whether it was a Halloween horror program or a sci-fi program or one of the various letter groups, LGBT. And that then plus the quality. I mean, we can be frank about it. If your picture is off, but your sound is great, that's not a problem. An audience is willing to forgive you for having a terrible picture and great sound. But if you have terrible sound and you didn't actually spend the money necessary to make sure your sound is spot on and your picture is great, no audience member is going to stick around. They're going to walk out of the theater. People are not willing to deal with ear pollution. And there were a couple of cases in the past where we'd have a film that I really wanted to screen that was really well done, but the filmmaker had made a artistic decision on playing a tone at some ungodly pitch at some place in the film for way too long. And I had to go and individually talk to the filmmaker and explain that this pitch will have people walking out of the theater. I know and this is your choice. If you want to keep that in there, that's you. I do want to screen this film, but I'm telling you, it's unscreenable with that specific sound issue. And as we were talking before we started, both of us have kind of sound setups to be able to do this so that things sound decently. And really, there are so many options now for professional sound interfaces and such that are both usable on doing video blogs and also usable on the filmmaking set. That's why I have what I use, a sound devices system that works great. But there's also a lot of Zoom systems that work wonderful too. So sound plays a lot in, obviously content. I mean, yeah, just don't bore anyone. Have some decent pacing. You don't need to have crazy special effects, but tell a story and tell it within a decent amount of time. Shorts, any short that's over 15 minutes starts coming into issues. Short films are great. I think a lot of filmmakers make a short film thinking it's going to be their calling card, thinking it's going to be easy to get into festivals. But really, once you've done the festival circuit, you see how many festivals play absolutely zero shorts. And if they do a block or two of shorts, out of the 30 features they show 10 short films the entire festival. And that becomes kind of a problem.
Yeah, you mentioned sound, and we're living in an era now where it's sort of standard. If you're watching a movie on TV, you're gonna have the subtitles on. It's sort of,
Yeah.
and I think it's a result of the loudness war where audio it's a little harder to make out, and just the slightest change in the way movies are mixed and stuff like that, people really need to understand what's happening. It's a story of Clerks where everyone talks about, it was made for what, $26,000, but they don't talk about the fact that they spent, what is it, $200,000-$300,000 afterwards re-recording all the sound, because everyone could handle the rough 16 millimeter footage, but you have to really understand what you're hearing, because that is the story.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You have to hear it. I think the same thing happened with Blair Witch. We were one of the first festivals to screen Blair Witch well before they even had a final film. It was like raw footage. And I believe that was also a case where there was like $200,000-$300,000 worth of post-production put into the audio alone. Yeah, it really, like, audio is so important. What I do with my films is I always do a loudness pass on the dialogue. The dialogue all has to meet loudness standards. Everything else can be where it is, but I always make sure I run it through. And I use some of the Isotope suite. I don't know if you've used any of the Isotope, like Isotope RX. Isotope RX is perhaps the best denoising system, and it isolates dialogue. It removes reverb from the room. It can isolate tones and pull them out. It's like Photoshop for sound, and it's well worth every single dollar put into it. It's saved my butt time and time again. But on that system, there is a loudness check that you can run it through and make sure that everything is at the loudness you want it at. There's no reason why people shouldn't hear your dialogue unless you're really doing some mumblecore where it doesn't matter, which is not
Yeah.
my style.
McCabe and Mrs. Miller. I always think of that movie. If everyone could switch on the subtitles in the early 70s, if that movie might have done a little better upon initial release. Uh, you're a filmmaker too, and sort of, you get to be on both sides of the coin
Yeah.
where you make movies, you want to entertain the audience, you follow the golden rule of just don't be boring. And at the same time, you get to judge movies. How does one influence the other for you?
Very tightly, because sometimes new filmmakers does get submissions of films before other festivals do, and there are times in which we get a submission of a film and I catch a major post-production issue well before anyone else does. There was a film, we had a feature that was shot in Italy a couple of years ago. Beautiful film, shot really well. And within the first couple of frames, I was like, something feels off about this. Everything feels, and I started pausing it. I was like, that's sharp. And then I went a couple more frames. I was like, that's sharp too. That shouldn't be sharp. And what I caught was that the cinematographer they hired in Italy had used the wrong shutter angle on the camera. It was nothing that could ever be fixed, but basically he had gotten rid of the motion blur. So it was probably like a 360-degree shutter angle instead of a 180-degree shutter angle.
It's like watching a soap opera.
Yeah, it was even worse than that, because it was like, and you feel really bad when you catch something like that, because there's no way to fix it. I contacted a couple of my friends who do heavy post production. They're like, I mean, you could theoretically take a nuke and add in motion blur to every frame, but it won't really fix it. So
It's funny how there's something about movies where we sort of don't want it to look too real, where you want that 24 frames. Even
yeah,
even with digital cameras, there's been a huge revitalization of older lenses from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s being rehoused because they just tend to look better with the sharpness of new digital cameras. What is it where we sort of, we want to be immersed in the movie and believe the story, but we like to have something sort of stylized in front of us. We don't want to be looking into a window and make it feel like, we're there, where it's sort of theater.
I think it hits into that part of our brain where things, when they're too perfect, just don't look real. I can't remember the name of the effect, but in Rogue One, when they brought back the two dead actors, and there were just these little things you could see in the face and such. And if you're at certain distances in the theater, you were like, that's just not a real person. I think when things are way too perfect, they just don't feel real. I know I don't do well with motion smoothing. I've got a couple of friends who have taken it as their life's work to inform everyone about motion smoothing and turn it off on every hotel screen they come across. It just feels unreal to me. Things feel like they're moving too fast. And I know it's supposedly great for sports, but I can't do it. Yeah, it really does hit into that. Like, it's way too real. We want to see what we see in our dreams. We want to see what we see in our aspirations. It was Jack Warner who said, you want beautiful people doing beautiful things, and it's this aspirational thing. We don't want to really live within the nightmare we we live in, and we don't want to be reminded of it. We want to live in some other place for a little bit that's not so stressful, that we can become someone else.
Yeah, I have a new TV and I saw there's like the different modes. One of them is filmmaker mode, which literally all it does is just you cannot turn on the motion smoothing. It's sort of like locked away. And it's interesting you said it's sort of like our dreams because I mean movies come from an imagination, but it's sort of like, you know, your imagination isn't real. It's sort of in your head. It's your stylized representation of how you view the real world, and that's sort of what cinema is. It's this representation of the real world, and it sort of is like you're looking into your own mind, except someone did it for you.
Yeah. And that's say we became filmmakers because we daydream. We became filmmakers because we have stories to tell, and maybe some of us didn't have the easiest upbringing as children, and now we are using it to, you know, to tell some stories and things.
Some people became comedians, and then the rest of us wanted to be behind the camera. You know,
Yeah.
it's
I mean, I wanted to be a comedian, but unfortunately I haven't managed the marriage yet to get to the divorce, and I like my mother too much. I think there was one comedian who said you really can't do it unless you have a problem with your mother. So
it's a path for yeah. It's sort of like this artistic path where movies become an escape. It's you know you. It's not that you can necessarily change reality, but it's sort of like a therapeutic trying to sort of understand reality.
yeah.
What is it?
And it's a modern day mythos. You know, modern day mythos, and that's why people get into Star Wars. That's why the recent Star Wars didn't do so well. That's why now that they've got Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni in charge, all of a sudden they're getting closer back to the original mythos. They're doing better. Will they be able to actually regain the audience they lost when they decided to toss the mythos under the bus? I don't know. You know, when you look at the recent three films, they were losing 30% of their audience per film. It was that bad. And you have to respect the audience, especially when the audience has put so much of their life into a specific myth or legend.
You think maybe it's also a little bit of genre fatigue? Because we sort of you look at charts of genre and popularity where it's war films, westerns. You know, westerns were one of the most popular genres for decades and have sort of fallen off. And there's ebbs and flows, and I sort of feel like these superhero movies, it sort of are like the modern day western,
Yes,
and you know,
they are. I mean, they fit the bill. Firefly was very on the nose with being a modern day Western. Mandalorian is obviously a modern day Western. I mean, even with entering the bar with the sound of the whistle in the background, like it's and there may be some genre fatigue, but I think there's more fatigue of audiences not wanting to be preached at. We have a lot of different people in the world, and the minute you start preaching at people, and I come from a very religious background, so I saw this firsthand with religion. You lose 50% of people, and I don't know that an art form can continue to sustain itself while, you know, telling 50% of people to go screw off. I don't think that that's a sustainable business model.
yeah, that's going on. It seems like a lot with everything right now, where I mean, you can't reach an audience who you sort of don't like. You know, like if you know you don't like your
Yeah,
audience, how are you going to try to reach them? And then it sort of becomes this divisive thing where it's like, well, this movie's not for you. Well, the audience is going to react. You know, the audiences get
yeah,
angry. And, you know, I do think the pendulum swings. I think the audience is always right. And it's happened before with, the studio system collapsing in the 60s. And then you had sort of the new Hollywood movement where I do see at some point, money obviously defines everything. At some point, I think you are going to start having movies, whether intentionally or unintentionally, start reaching people that, start talking about things that not necessarily people are interested in, but at least the very least respect the audience, which
Yeah.
I think you used to have more often. I think now, the audience is smarter than we're necessarily given credit for these days.
Well, the audience is smarter and also stupider than we give them credit for. How many times have you been on YouTube, sat there and been fed videos for 3 hours, and you don't realize it's just the artificial intelligence backbone refeeding you, and that's only going to become more and more. I think originally we all thought that artificial intelligence was going to go directly after certain management jobs, certain support jobs, things like that. But really, the greatest threat to us as filmmakers, I think, moving forward, is going to be AI. I think AI driven scripts, I think AI driven algorithms, AI driven Unity based filmmaking are going to be the greatest threats to filmmakers in the next 20 years, because you want to make your vision. But the fact is that your vision isn't just a continual load of crack that will keep a audience member watching and watching and watching. And I would be surprised if an AI couldn't write a 5 hour long film that people were willing to sit through in a way that they wouldn't sit through a 5 hour long art film.
Yeah, it's a little scary because some of the best movies, I mean, comes from experience, like Steven
Yeah.
Spielberg's childhood. And I'm not talking about The Fablemans because, I mean, he's already told that story through all of his movies. You watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you have that broken family sort of storyline in there, which drives the whole thing. And that's something that comes from, someone's real childhood, someone's real life that's coming out, in an artistic form of expression. Whereas, AI, you mentioned being on YouTube for hours upon hours. I actually found myself having to like wean myself off of it. And now I just, I strictly go to movies or, plan in advance what it is that I want to watch. And it feels like cigarettes. I think this is going to be sort of like the next, there was the sort of campaign against smoking, and everyone sort of finally came to terms with the fact that we should probably maybe, move past the era of smoking. I think that's going to happen with social media at some point because, just like people used to wake up, first thing they do is reach for a pack of cigarettes. Now, first thing people do is reach for their smartphone, check social media apps, stuff like that. It is this sort of addiction that doesn't hurt you right away, doesn't hurt you immediately, but over time builds up something in you that is making you enjoy life less. Like cigarettes, you don't feel the effects of it until 30 years down the line.
Yeah. I mean, that hopefully there will be a movement against TikTok.
Yeah.
It's not helping people to sit in their chairs and watch a movie for an hour and a half.
Let AI write that movie, The Insider, except about social media, you know.
Oh dear, the chat GBT tonight.
When you write a movie now, you go into that process when you're planning a project. Obviously you get to see it from the other side as well. Everyone's submitting movies, the AI aspect where the industry might be going. Obviously you're still inspired to do what you're doing, but how do you approach it knowing the environment? Or do you still keep in mind, let me do it the way I would have done it, say 20 years ago?
I still do it the same way, and that is from a marketing approach. Who is my audience? Who is the film for? I always have a rough title, usually a one-word title, and a poster well before I have a script or an outline. I think you have to, if you want to be a filmmaker who is sustainable and actually able to make their next film, you have to understand who your audience is and who's buying tickets. You will be much more successful in the film festival circuit if you understand those things. Case in point, I went into Philadelphia with my last feature film. This was a few years ago, a week before we screened at the festival. And this is QFlex. I love QFlex. The people at QFlex are great. If you've got an LGBT film, definitely one to submit to. So I got there a week early. I hit every single bar in town that was fit within the genre. I had posters up in every single bathroom stall I could possibly find, so people had it in their face for long enough for them to actually get it into their brain. And on the night of the screening, after 7 days of heavy marketing, I had a completely sold out audience in a 600-seat theater. That is your job as a filmmaker. If you do not understand that you are ultimately responsible for putting butts in the seat, and you start with that understanding when you make the movie, then this isn't the industry for you. There were people well before us who had so much heart in making their films and selling their films that they would bicycle their films across the country. It is all about shaking hands. It's all about meeting people, and it's all about you understanding your responsibility to put people in the seats.
Yeah, you got to be your own marketer. I
You
mean,
have to. You
yeah.
have to. And if you think, oh, I'm going to make it and people will come, no, they won't.
No, I mean,
They
Ed
don't.
Wood.
Yeah.
We still talk about Ed Wood, not because he made phenomenal movies, not because they were bad movies, but because he was a great marketer. A lot of filmmakers made bad movies, but
Yeah.
nobody saw them. People saw his movies because he was able to get you in the theater.
Yeah, he was. And people build an audience for the movies they make. I case in point, Jim Wynorski, who is one of the Roger Corman alumni. There's three Corman alumni that I've worked with in various stages of my life. I made 2 features with Jim Wynorski in the course of 5 days. We took a day off in between the two. So we shot 35 pages a day for 2 days. We took a day off. We shot 35 pages a day for 2 days. One
That's
of
insane.
those was called, oh gosh, at the time, who knows, Sexually Bugged, but I think they renamed it Sexapede. And another, I don't know. I mean, they're exploitation films,
Mhm.
but it's a genre. He knows his genre. He sells his genre, and he has an audience who is willing to buy it. And even at his advanced age, I think he's in his 80s at this point. He's made over 200 films. He's still going, and he's still able to get investment. He's still able to get distribution. The movies go somewhere.
I mean, that's ultimately what it's all about. And,
Yeah.
that it's a profession. I think we all want to be artists, and to some extent, I think we are, even though there's no real definition to the word. But ultimately, you want to get paid to make movies. That's what it
Yeah.
is. It's a job. And when you say making 200 movies, you look at all the filmmakers from the 40s and 30s, the filmographies they had, they would make
Yeah.
like 4 or 5 movies a year. They would go to
Yeah.
set, make a movie, make another one. Before we jump off, I want to ask you, because you mentioned the title of a movie and a poster of a movie, which are incredibly important, especially, if you have the responsibility of marketing your own work. What do you look for? What really stands out for you in terms of a title or a poster for a movie?
Something that gets right to the point and describes the film. What the film that I made, that one was Grinder. It was spelled correctly, ER, but it was a gay psychological thriller, an art film. But for that audience, they knew exactly what it was when they saw it, even spelled right. And the gentleman on the poster, good looking young guy with a hood over his head. And for some reason, that image reads very well. There are some images that audiences very much go for. You have to have a person on there. You have to make it very concise. When you get to long titles that are over 2, 3 words, anything over 2 words, The audience doesn't care what your ironic title is. They don't care. They don't care about the irony. There are some filmmakers who like to kind of flex and say, "Oh, I'm smart. Look how intelligent I am. Look at this ironic, intelligent title I came up with." The audience doesn't care. And it's going to turn them off. You have to have something concise. What is this story about? What really drills down and what is appealing? And then what is that appealing thing on the poster? Put a person on the poster. Put a good looking person on the poster. Consider this when you're casting. You are casting something where you want people to aspire to be in it. You want, because for those 90 minutes, they are sitting in the theater. They're not watching your film. They are in your film and they want to aspire. And I think that's something that's getting lost more and more and more, is that people really want to watch something that's they aspire to be in. Like, I don't want to be in my boring life. I don't want to be around some of the boring people I know. I want to be around the cool kids.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's sort of like today's culture is to fight the philosophies that were the foundation of some of our favorite movies. Where it's like, you look at your list of favorite movies, whatever they may be, and the reasoning behind a lot of the decisions are what today it's sort of not okay to think. Like you said, you want good-looking people in a movie. Yes, it's Hollywood. It's you're looking at. I remember someone saying, when you're looking at a movie on a big screen, at a close-up, you're looking at a person's face 60 feet. Size 60 feet. Why?
Yeah.
That's almost becomes like religion. You're looking at a monument to this individual, and you sort of have to build a cult of personality with the people on the screen. That's what star power is. And I don't think it's something to be judged as good or bad. I just think it's the reality, and it's the power of cinema. And you either love movies or you don't. But it's like you can't hate the player; you have to hate the game. That's the game. That's what cinema is.
Yeah, it very much is, and that's why we do it.
Obsessively.
Very much, very much.
Thank you so much. I love the fact that,
Cheers.
because of your experience, there's so much actionable advice for filmmakers out there where, you always try to go with your gut and say, oh, what's the artistic decision? Sometimes you have to go with the scientific decision. That's what gets your story in front of the audience. So thank you for dropping the advice. And I'd love to do this again.
Sure, anytime, man. Anytime. Thank you for having me on.
Like what you hear? Subscribe.